Welcome to the Farrms Friday Food File Podcast. It's your contrarian agrarian, Sue Belcom here. We have a special treat for our next 3 Friday Food Files. No, we're not going to talk about recipes. We're actually going to run some excerpts from Fred Kirschenmann's homily that he gave at the Carl Limbeer Memorial Classroom Dedication about 2 years ago at Farrms. It's a timely topic about the ruralification of America and how it could affect small towns in North Dakota. You really need to take heart when you listen to what Fred has to say about the evolution of rural America. And he gives us an actual target date of when we might be able to expect that things have normalized and there will be thriving rural communities everywhere. You don't want to miss the next 3 weeks of Friday Food File podcasts from Farrms. Here's Fred.
And the first of those 3 phases, he said that first phase was from the American Revolution until the late 1800s, and what he called the frontier phase. And this was when this country was in the process. Had the frontier, and people moved out into the frontier, including North Dakota. And the rural communities in that phase were expected to provide the raw materials for exports. Because rural communities produce cotton to export, they produce tobacco to export, and other kinds of crops, etc. Because during that phase, we weren't yet developing we didn't have our own manufacturing capacity developed, so we had to import our manufactured goods, and to fund that, we exported our raw materials, and we expected the rural communities to do that. In other words, rural communities existed in order to serve another economic part of the equation. And then the second phase, he said, which he called the storehouse phase, and this was from the late 1800s until about 1970. And this was the time when we were developing our own industrial capacity. And so we needed the raw materials to be transported into our urban communities so that our urban communities had the raw materials to do this great industrial miracle that everybody talked about. So again, rural communities were not valued for themselves, but they were only valued for the raw materials that they could supply to other parts of the economy. And then Carl Stauber argued that in about 1970, we moved into a third phase, which he identifies as the economies of scale phase. This was a time when economies began to recognize that the way to really be successful is you have to get big. And all of us who are farmers remember when even our Secretary of Agriculture said, get big or get out, that's your choice. Adapt or die, one of the other Secretaries of Agriculture said. So this is what you had to do. And again, rural communities were not valued in this because if you get big, and we've seen this happen here in Medina, we've seen it in many of our other rural communities, as everything gets bigger, you no longer need your rural community to supply some of the basic goods and services that you previously had. And so, we're now reaching a point where, and those of us here in North Dakota know this, of course, where some of the basic services that we need in our communities are gradually disappearing. And so it seemed like this is the end of the game, right? And here you had Carl, here in Medina, saying things like, if you put your community's needs before your own, you always win. And that sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? So, what was he thinking? Well, Carl was a kind of individual who could see beyond all of these things and could see the value in terms of our lives and what really are the things that provide value to us. And that was part of his passion, and that was part of his ministry, and the great contribution that he made to this community.
Thank you for joining us today for the Friday Food File podcast and Fred Kirschenmann's talk. Find future podcasts on our new website at farmsnews.com or on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/farmsnews and on our iTunes channel. It's easy to join us every week for Farms News and Views. If you have an issue, a comment, or would you like to be a guest on our next episode, call 701-527-5169 or 701-486-3569 or email info@farms.org. Don't forget to stop by often at farmsnews.com. We'll see you next week for another Friday Food File podcast. Bye now.